Hello and welcome to the comprehensive news analysis by Byju's IAS. The first article that we have for you from today's Hindu newspaper is this. Tomorrow is Children's Day, that is a birthday of our first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. So, no wonder most of the articles in the Hindu newspaper today were about Nehru and his policies. This article is from the Congress Member of Parliament Shashi Tharoor, where he talks about the relevance of Jawaharlal Nehru's legacy. Now, this kind of an article gives you a lot of content to write in questions of post independence India and also to be quoted in your essay paper if it is relevant enough. Now, the article starts by saying that India was blessed to have four extremely strong leaders at the time of our independence. That is Gandhi, Nehru, Patel, and Ambedkar, who had their own styles of working, who had their own priorities, and excelled at all their fields. Gandhi, as we know, was a stalwart of peace, of non-violence, who taught the entire world how we can fight the entire empire without using violence. Patel, on the other hand, was a hard taskmaster. He was given the most difficult assignments at the time of India's independence and he excelled at all of them. Be it unifying India, be it talking to Kashmir's Maharaja, convincing other people to join India as against remaining independent or joining Pakistan. Ambedkar, well known to be the crusader for the depressed classes, for women rights, he played an unmatchable role in the making of the Indian independence. However, holding all of them together as the face of the Indian government in India and across the world was Jawaharlal Nehru. Till the time that Gandhi was alive, Nehru worked in the shadow of Gandhi and obeyed most of his orders. However, after Gandhi passed away, the stature that Jawaharlal Nehru had was unmatched by anyone except Vallabhbhai Patel. And Vallabhbhai Patel also passed away unfortunately in 1950. After 1950, it would be correct to say that there was no other leader across the country who could match the stature of Jawaharlal Nehru. At this point of time, even though he could have taken any decision that he wanted, he could have made any policy without any opposition from within the party or outside, but Nehru did not opt for that approach. Even when Congress was in majority overwhelmingly in all parts of the country, he made it a point to listen to his opposition members, give enough time to everyone to speak in the parliament. In fact, Nehru was very fond of writing letters to every chief minister asking them for their feedback on government policies and used to implement many of them if they were found to be good. One of the unique traits of Nehru's personality was that he was able to connect with people from all the backgrounds, be it those from the privileged class, the laborers, the farmers, the socialists, the intellectuals, and others as well. Let me give you a few instances of how Jawaharlal Nehru was different as compared to the other leaders of his time and the leaders of today. This was in 1959 when Nehru had to go to inaugurate a dam at Panchet village in Dhanbad district. It was not a new thing for him to go and inaugurate a dam because India was building a lot of dams in the first couple of decades of our independence. When he reached here, Nehru insisted a 15-year-old worker on the side called Budhni Mejhan to inaugurate the dam on his behalf by pressing the power button and start the operations. There is also a very famous photograph of this occasion where this worker is standing with Jawaharlal Nehru pressing the button of the dam. Let me give you one more instance. I'm sure in your modern history you all would have read about the Nehru Report. Nehru Report in 1928 was India's first attempt at making its own constitution. It was called the Nehru Report not because of Jawaharlal Nehru but because of his father Motilal Nehru. Amongst the members there were Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. Now, after the report came out and it suggested that India should have dominion status, there were some people in the committee itself who were against the report. The two people who were so against the committee were Jawaharlal Nehru and Subhash Chandra Bose. Just imagine Jawaharlal Nehru along with Subhash Chandra Bose raising objections against a committee in which they were themselves member, raising objections against a committee which was headed by Jawaharlal Nehru's father itself. Why? Because they wanted the Nehru report to talk about complete independence and not dominion status. Apart from that, till about 1958 1959, Nehru also made it a tradition to have a daily darshan at the Prime Minister's residence, meaning that for 1 hour every single day, his house was open to anyone without appointment who could just walk in and demand to meet the Prime Minister. Of course, once the security threats started to increase, that practice had to be curtailed. But these examples highlight how our first Prime Minister made it a point to connect with the people and to ensure that everyone feels a part of this country together and has a feeling of taking the country forward. There are many YouTube clippings of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, who was one of the youngest members of parliament at that time when Jawaharlal Nehru was the prime minister, saying that he used to criticize Nehru a lot in the parliament because he was from the opposition, and Jawaharlal Nehru, despite having a much bigger stature than Atal Bihari Vajpayee at that time, he used to listen to him patiently and give him all the time to ask questions. This is what the legacy of our first prime minister is. Nehru is well known for his four major initiatives, including building democratic institutions across the country, secularism, focus on socialism, and a foreign policy of non alignment, about which we will discuss later on. Not just this, Nehru was also against Mahatma Gandhi in some ideas about how India should develop after independence. For instance, while Gandhi wanted the government to focus more on the villages and manual skills, Nehru had a more scientific mindset. That is why he was a person behind building scientific base of India in those years in the form of the IITs, the ISRO and the nuclear program that India is so proud of even today. The one thing that we ignore usually is that Nehru was considered as a leader of not just India but as a leader of the developing world altogether. At least till 1950s, Nehru had an excellent image of a statesman. Whenever he used to go to US or Europe, he used to receive a big reception because of his oratory skills, because of the clarity of his ideas, since he used to talk not just about India but about the developing world and how we should move towards an egalitarian society as a whole. This is the legacy of Nehru at a time when all his decisions, deservingly or undeservingly, are questioned by everyone, even those who have not read a word about Nehru. The second article that we have for you from the Hindu newspaper today is about the non aligned movement, that is one of the biggest foreign policy initiatives taken by Jawaharlal Nehru. I'm sure you all are aware of the basic concept of non alignment. That is, after the Second World War, the world was divided into two groups, one led by the US and the other led by the USSR. Both the groups wanted the smaller countries to join their camps so that they can consolidate their power. At that time, India and some other developing nations such as Yugoslavia, Egypt, Indonesia, Ghana decided that it would be best if they don't join any of the two groups and rather they remain non aligned. However, the idea of non alignment did not start here. If you go to the history, the idea of non alignment goes back to 1814 to the Congress of Vienna. You would know that Switzerland, the European country, is considered to be a non aligned country forever. That is, in no war so far, the World War One or World War Two, Switzerland has ever taken any side or is expected to join any group. Because as per this treaty in 1814, Switzerland was given a status of a neutral country and was recognized by every other European country. Now, when India decided to take up this initiative of non alignment, it was criticized by many countries across the world, including by the US extremely strongly. In fact, at many times the US made fun of India, saying that India is too weak to take any position in the world affairs, and that is why they are opting for a easier option and saying that we are non aligned because we don't want to participate in the world affairs. However, Nehru clarified this multiple times that non alignment does not mean that we would not take part in the world affairs. Non alignment simply means that in every single issue, before taking sides blindly, we would first see the merits of the issue. We would see which side, the US side or the USSR side or some other side, is correct, and then we will take sides. The reality was, at the time that India became independent, India needed help from both the groups, and we could not afford to just be a part of a single group. While the US helped us with food grains under their famous PL 480 program, the USSR helped us with technology, since most of India's heavy industries were built with the support of USSR. Not just this, at least till 1980s, almost all of India's weapons, except the aircraft that we used to buy from France, used to come from USSR only at a very good price. However, it would be wrong to say that India followed the policy of non alignment strictly. There were many instances of India taking the side of USSR while still saying that we are non aligned. For example, in 1956, the USSR invaded Hungary. Now, the Western world obviously was against this invasion, and they initiated a resolution against the USSR United Nations. In this resolution, India was the only non aligned country to vote in favor of USSR while still maintaining that we are non aligned. You all are aware of how India signed the Treaty of Peace, Friendship, and Cooperation with the USSR just before going to a war against Pakistan. However, it would be wrong to say that India was the only non aligned country which was not taking this initiative seriously. For instance, in 1962, when India went on a war with China, we hoped that the other non aligned countries would support India, which was not the case. Of all the non aligned nations, there were only two countries, that is, Cyprus and Ethiopia, that supported India, which highlighted the fact that the non aligned movement is more of a formality rather than a group of countries which are willing to support and help each other when a superpower comes at their door threatening them over their sovereignty. Although the non aligned movement exists even today, but it has lost a lot of significance. In the past few summits of the non aligned movement, the Prime Minister has given it a miss and has sent some other dignitaries to attend on behalf of India. Not just the non aligned movement, there have been multiple other groupings which seemed to be important at that time but now are losing significance. That includes the BRICS, that includes SARC, initiatives where India has not been able to gain much despite having a lot of potential. Now, it is also important to understand that in the GS2 paper, questions about the non aligned movement and its significance are extremely common. They have been asked multiple times, especially about whether NAM is relevant today or not, should India utilize this platform to aim for a better global image, etc. That is why it's important to understand a few facts about the non aligned movement. Till today, it remains one of the largest grouping of nations outside the UN with about 120 members. It officially came into being in 1961 with joint initiative of leaders of five nations, that is Joseph Broz Tito of Yugoslavia, Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, Jawaharlal Nehru of India, Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, and Sukarno of Indonesia. NAM was initially made for a time when the world was divided into two groups led by the US and the USSR. After the Cold War ended, that is in 1991, when these two groups don't exist officially, there has been a lot of questions about the role of NAM. Firstly, questions about whether NAM did anything good in the Cold War era. Secondly, questions whether NAM now needs to exist or not. First, let's talk about the role in the Cold War era. NAM did raise a lot of voice against the ongoing apartheid, that is, racial discrimination in South Africa. It also talked about disarmament, asking the developed nations to give up their arms. It also raised voice in favor of the UNSC reforms and brought to the forefront the need to expand the Security Council. However, at the same time, it was not able to resolve any regional issues. We had a lot of NAM members fighting with themselves and not being able to resolve issues. Now, the people who say that NAM does not have any significance today and should be dissolved because the world is no longer divided into two groups are partially correct and partially wrong. That is, the world still has two groups, just that the second group now is not led by USSR but is led by China. Secondly, the objectives behind formation of NAM was not just about having a neutral group. It was also about leading the world towards disarmament, leading the world towards UNSC reforms, and pacifying the regional tensions. These issues still remain throughout the world. We are still hoping for a world where disarmament becomes a reality. We are still hoping for a world where UNSC reforms could be achieved, and we are still hoping for a world where regional issues could be resolved peacefully. So, since these objectives have not been fulfilled, it makes sense for NAM to go on, work strongly, and ensure that there is a group outside the UN which is not dominated by the developed nations and can call out these strong nations whenever needed. The next article that we have again takes us back to the Climate Change Summit, which has been covered extensively. We talked about this yesterday also, but today we will focus more on the money behind the climate change debate. In the recently concluded Glasgow summit, where India announced that 2070 would be a target for net zero, a lot of people were taken by surprise. First, because not many people expected India to make such an announcement. Secondly, because the developed nations have been trying extremely hard to bring all the nations to accept that the net zero target should be 2050 and not later. However, the reality is India has set a target of 2070 while China has set a target of 2060. Many experts say that this is too far, and even if we do achieve this target, it would be pretty late and the average temperature of the earth would increase significantly. Now, when we talk about the climate change debate, the one thing that we don't really focus on is the funding behind it. We have seen how in the past few days India has reiterated that in order for us to achieve our goals, we would require a help of not less than $1 trillion from the developed nations. Now, it is important to put this into perspective. At multiple climate change summits, whenever we talk about funding from developed nations to the developing nations, the goal that has been set is of $100 billion per year collectively to all the developing nations. And now compare this with the demand that India is making of getting $1 trillion for its goal. There is no match between these two. And that is why the experts say that India's goals don't seem to be turning into a reality because of this huge gap in the funding. Now, it also gives us an opportunity to look into the present status of funding on climate change. As I said, the countries agreed that a sum of $100 billion would be transferred annually from developed nations to the developing nations for projects specifically aimed at controlling the negative impact of climate change. Many experts say that this target is too big and the developed nations have not shown any initiative to achieve that target. On the other hand, the OECD, that is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, a group of developed nations, claimed in 2018 that about $78.9 billion have reached from developed nations to the developing nations for fighting climate change. However, there is a bit of twist in this. That is, most of that money that has gone from developed nations to the developing nations is not in the form of grants. So try and understand this. There are two ways in which the developed nations can give money to the developing nations. That is, in the form of grants and in the form of loans. Grants means the money does not have to be given back. Loan again means that the money has to be given back. In loans also it is of two kinds. It can be a concessional loan or it can be a non-concessional loan. Concessional loan means a loan at an extremely low rate of interest. So the developing nations obviously want the money to come in the form of grants. If not grants, if it is coming in the form of loans, then at least it should be at an extremely low rate of interest. The reality, however, is slightly different. Of the money that the OECD figures tell, a lot of that has come from the private sector, from the companies. Obviously, when the private companies give this money, it would be in the form of a loan at a market rate of interest. It has not been from the government's pocket. The report says that about $62 billion were given by the government. Of that, only 20% was grant, and the remaining 80% was in the form of a loan. Not just this, about half of the loans that were given to the developing nations were non concessional, meaning that this money transfer that is happening from the developed nations to the developing nations, number one, has not even reached its years old target of $100 billion per year. Secondly, even the amount of money that is being given is mostly at the market rate, which will put a lot more pressure on the developing nations to give it back. Now, the US, which is the self appointed world leader, recently announced that it will increase its funding and expenditure on climate change. However, the past record is not very encouraging. For example, the US President Barack Obama promised that the US will provide $3 billion in funding to the Green Climate Fund. However, it ended up delivering only $1 billion. So the past record of the US does not suggest that they will live up to their promises on the climate change front. Thus, the issue of climate change cannot be seen separately from the issue of funding that is required to control the negative impact of climate change. The next article that we have is about Pakistan saying that it will consider transit facilities of Indian wheat. Now, the background is ever since the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, Afghanistan has been facing a lot of crises, including food shortage. India agreed to deliver large amounts of wheat to Afghanistan, but since we don't have any direct connectivity to Afghanistan by road, the only way that it could be delivered is through Pakistan. But as you have seen in the newspaper, Pakistan has denied entry to Indian trucks going to Afghanistan. Now, today, Pakistan is saying that if our Afghan brothers request us, then we will consider opening borders for the Indian trucks. Whether Pakistan will do it or not, only the time will tell. However, it is important for us to understand whether there are some other options or whether or not India has been planning to bypass Pakistan and reach Afghanistan through some other way in the past. Now, this is where the Chabahar port story becomes important. As you know, the Chabahar port is a port that is in Iran, which India has been helping develop by giving it significant amount of funding. This picture that you see is an old picture, so please don't believe this information for present. This is the information from 2017 because Pakistan has not done this for the first time, that is denying entry to Indian trucks going to Afghanistan. They are in a habit of doing this. So in the past also, when they did this, India took the water route, which is obviously a longer route, but at least allows India to enter Afghanistan. That is reaching the Chabahar port and then using the rail and the roadways to enter Afghanistan. Now, this gives us an opportunity to look at the present status of the Chabahar port. Where does India stand? And is it now safe to say that the Chabahar port also has become a controversy with the involvement of China as well? Now, as I said, if you look at Chabahar port, it is extremely important because number one, it allows India access to Afghanistan without depending on Pakistan. Second, it also allows India access to Central Asian nations which have a lot of resources but are landlocked nations and can't export it outside. So, for both those issues, Chabahar port is an extremely important investment for India. Now, because it is important for India, Iran also understands it, and Iran has been using this leverage to bring in more money into their country. Now, interestingly, Chabahar is the only deep sea port in Iran which has a direct ocean access. And not just this, Chabahar is one of the few places in Iran that is exempt from US sanctions. Now, what exactly do we mean by this? As we know, US has imposed a lot of sanctions on Iran, so much so that US even forced India not to buy oil from Iran or reduce our oil orders from Iran. Otherwise, US threatened India that it will also face sanctions. Interestingly, however, the Chabahar port is one of the few projects which has not been added in the sanction list. Why? Because the US understands that Chabahar port can be used by many nations to reach Afghanistan. And since the US has maintained that they want to help Afghanistan, they are giving exemption to Chabahar port, thinking that it would not be misused, it would lead to development of Afghanistan and development of Iran also legally. This allows Iran to invite many countries across the world to participate and to team up for development of Chabahar port. Now, India first showed interest in Chabahar port in 2003, but it only seriously materialized in 2016 when Prime Minister Modi announced that India would invest $500 million in the development of the Chabahar port. However, the problem is with India, these announcements are pretty easy to make. But when it comes to dispersing money, that is where India lags. Of late, there have been multiple news stories of Iran government saying that India is delaying the investments in the Chabahar port and in the infrastructure that is to be built nearby. And that has given a chance to China to intervene in between. China recently signed a 25-year cooperation program with Iran saying that it will invest $400 billion. Just imagine this, $400 billion in Iran's economy. Now, this agreement did not talk about the Chabahar port, but we know when a country promises such a big amount to the other country, it can ask for any kind of favor. That is what has become problematic for India. Number one, India cannot match the money power that China has. Second, China is the only country which is not afraid of US putting sanctions on it. So they are not afraid of signing this deal with Iran, which has put the Chabahar port in a very interesting position. Iran is trying to see how can it get the best deal by balancing both India and China. India wants to ensure that China does not become a part of the Chabahar project or does not have influence in Iran. And China, on the other hand, is just playing the game that they always do. The next article that we have for you today is the Union government's decision to finally allow 11 women permanent commission position in the Indian Army. This comes after the Supreme Court's decision warning the central government to implement the decision given by the court. Now, before going into the detail of what this issue is, it is important to understand what do we mean by permanent commission and how does it work. It was in 1992 that women officers were first inducted into the army. Now, when women were first inducted into the army, they were given a 5-year tenure. This was called Women's Special Entry Scheme. As compared to women, when men join the Indian Army at commissioned positions, they are given an option of short service commission, which means that they can serve for 10 years. After 10 years, they have an option whether they can retire or they can change it into a permanent commission. Permanent commission means that they can be in the army till the age of their retirement. This is what short service commission is. In 1992, women were not given short service commission. They were only given 5 years of maximum tenure. So in 2003, a PIL was filed in the Delhi High Court saying that women officers should also be given permanent commissions. As a result, while they were not offered a permanent commission, in 2006, this 5-year scheme was converted to the 10-year scheme at par with the male officers in the Indian Army. However, women were not recruited in all the streams. For example, they were not recruited in the combat arms such as infantry and the armored corps. In 2008, there was one more development, that is, government offered permanent commission to women, that is, service till the retirement, but only in two branches. One, the Judge Advocate General, and second, the Army Educational Corps. So, for example, when you join the army, apart from the fighting, there are many other functions that are required inside the army. For example, we know that there are military tribunals. In military tribunals, when there is a case contested on an army officer, you need lawyers, judges who are from the army itself. So, that is where Judge Advocate General branch comes in. Secondly, army officers are trained, they are educated about the knowledge that is required in their field. For that, we have the Army Educational Corps. So in these two branches, women were offered permanent commissions, but not in the other branches. So this issue came up again in 2019-2020, where a bunch of women went to the Supreme Court asking for permanent commission in all the other branches of the army as well, leading to Supreme Court intervening in between and asking the government to ensure that the permanent commission is given to all women officers in the Indian Army in all branches except the combat roles. This is the Supreme Court judgment that came up in February 2020. However, the problem is between the judgment of the Supreme Court and its implementation, there are usually a lot of roadblocks. So, after the Supreme Court judgment came in, the government said that they will implement it. The Supreme Court had also said that the eligibility criteria should be that if women officers get 60% marks in their assessment, they should be offered a permanent commission. However, many women officers claimed that the army is not following this criteria and a lot of arbitrary decisions are being taken by the army. That is why 70 women again approached the Supreme Court in 2021 saying that they obtained over 60% marks in the assessment but were still not offered the chance at permanent commission, leading to the Supreme Court warning the government to take up appropriate action. On the basis of that warning, the government has offered 11 women officers the permanent commission position in the army. At the same time, it is also important to know what is the status of permanent commission for women in the other branches of the military. So, in the Indian Air Force, women officers who are recruited through the SSC in the Indian Air Force have the option of opting for the permanent commission in all the streams except in the flying branch. In the Indian Navy, in March 2020, the Supreme Court cleared the way for permanent commission to women in the Indian Navy as well. So, the Indian Navy has allowed permanent commission of women in a lot of departments such as logistics, naval designing, air traffic control, engineering, and in the legal department as well. These were the articles that we wanted to discuss with you from the Hindu newspaper today. Here are a couple of practice questions. Number one, do you agree with the government's argument that gender equality shouldn't apply to permanent commission for women in the army? Give arguments to support your answer. Second, India has lost a big opportunity to take the center stage in the world affairs by not utilizing the non aligned movement platform that it built. Suggest measures to change this. Both these questions have to be answered within 250 words. Thank you so much for watching the video.